Welcome to Smalltalk Daily for Tuesday, April 20th, 2010. This morning I thought I'd go through using some new features of the Oracle connection that we've got in ObjectStudio 8.2. The same stuff is going to work in VisualWorks, and I'll show you that next week. But I wanted to show it in ObjectStudio because the way you access the code is a little different in both libraries, although underneath it all it's the same stuff operating. So ObjectStudio is a little more ObjectStudio-like and VisualWorks a little more VisualWorks-like, but underneath it all you've got the same code running, so you can do the same things. To get started, what we want to do is go to Load Application, and you need to scroll down here to Oracle Database Client and load that. And this will bring a few things in. And it's going to prompt this window. I'm not going to worry about it because I don't really need to log in there. So I'm going to come down here to a workspace. Now you might notice that I've got a VisualWorks workspace here. The reason for that is that it has workspace variables, which means I can execute code line by line instead of having to execute right up to the cursor, which is not really what I want to do in this screencast. So what I've done is I've logged in a different little window here, and I've used this kind of code. You can take the Oracle database, tell it to log into the server, and give it the actual login environment string, your username and your password, and then you give it an ObjectStudio alias that you can use from there on out. So even though I've logged in using real credentials, I can now come into this, create this workspace variable, and tell it to access the database by that name where I've saved those credentials, and it'll go ahead and access it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through an example. I'm going to drop this table because I've created it to make sure this worked, and now I'm going to execute some SQL to create a table. It's just a simple table with an integer and a varchar in it. And what we're going to do is we're going to run through a couple of examples. First, we're going to create some records, and we're going to insert them into the database without array binding and see how long that takes. So we're going to create this SQL, we're going to iterate through the database, and we're then going to go ahead and just print out how long it takes. So looking at this, we're going to do a loop count, go from 1 to 1,000, just keep inserting stuff and see how long that takes. Now, to show you that, I'm going to open up a transcript window, and we'll clear this transcript so you can see what's going on. And you can see that running without array binding, it took 1,079 milliseconds, basically a little over a second. What we're going to do now is we're going to scroll down and we're going to use array binding. So what we're going to do is come in and start binding these columns in the database to ordered collections, and we're going to add things in that way and then insert them kind of en masse using the array binding. So we'll try that out. So let's go ahead and try the same code, or the same kind of code, but using the array binding stuff down here. And then we'll print that out. So we'll take a look at this briefly. You go through your loop, add the arrays in, bind them, and then you insert them into the table. And then we'll do it. And you see it's a lot faster. Instead of a full second, it's 37 milliseconds, so it's more or less instantaneous. You can see a huge improvement in how that works. Now let's come down here, and we're going to do a little test again, but pulling things out. So again, pulling all 1,000 records out one by one instead of array binding. So we'll start here, we'll scroll down, you notice we do a select, we set the array fetch size to 1, and then we're going to iterate through, execute the SQL, and keep doing it. And we'll try printing that out and see how that works. So we'll do it. And you can see that it takes 276 milliseconds to pull the 1,000 records out, going one by one. Now that's not terribly long, but could add up in a large application. So let's try setting the fetch size to 100. So we're going to bind into a 100 long array, which means it's going to have to do 10 fetches and possibly grow our array as we go. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we see here that we do this exact SQL the same way. So we'll do this and print that out and see how that works. And you see that dropped the time down to 31 milliseconds. Large scale improvement. Now this improvement's not going to be as big because there's not as big a win going from 100 to 500 as there was from 1 to 100. But let's go ahead and try it. We'll set the fetch size to 500, and then we'll go ahead and do the same exact thing. Do it. And you see that again, more or less the same thing as 100. So we already got the big benefit by going down to 100. Going to 500 didn't give us much benefit and gave us basically the same kind of performance. So this is the code that I was looking at here. Just set the fetch size, iterate through, execute the SQL, and then run it. So you can see a huge difference when you use array binding, both on insertions and on pulling out. So you see here, dropping from 1,079 milliseconds to 37 using array binding on inserts, and on fetches dropping from 276 to 31 using array binding. So big, huge difference, something you should be aware of when you're using Oracle with ObjectStudio. And again, next week I'll show you the same kind of thing using VisualWorks. So that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with Smalltalk.